Today at the Who Are You Intelligence Forum's podcast, we're privileged to have Richard Inglewood, who's a crossbench member of the House of Lords, a barrister and a chartered surveyor. Thank you very much indeed for joining this podcast today, Richard Inglewood.
Well, it's very nice of you to ask me, and I look forward to it.
So the first question I'd like to ask you is, could you let us know about your professional journey to where you are today?
It's a rather tortuous one, I think. I read land economy at Cambridge, and my father rather wanted me to be a land agent, but I didn't terribly enjoy that and was interested in law and a lot of the law associated with that sector. And so I read for the bar and spent a short time at the bar. But I then concluded, because I've got family interests in the north of England, up in Cumbria, where I live now, that I would actually shift sideways. And I worked for some planning consultants, Drivers Jonas, who were in Pall Mall. And while doing that, I used the basis of my land economy degree to become a chartered surveyor as well, although not as a land agent. I was a planning and development surveyor.
So you're Vice Lord Lieutenant of Cumbria, and you were the chairman of the Cumbria Local Enterprise Partnership.
Correct.
So Cumbria, you know a great deal about. What do you see the opportunities and challenges for Cumbria?
Well, I think it's got both. It is a place that has a lot going for it in some ways. It's a wonderful landscape. Some communications are making it a great deal more accessible than historically has been the case, although there are also, particularly I think in the connectivity context and the case of the notorious West Coast Main Line, there are problems. If we can get them resolved and progress is being made, I think that will both actually, and perhaps least as importantly, psychologically, make this part of England seem to be closer to what's going on in the rest of the country. But interestingly, Cumbria actually is in the centre of the United Kingdom. If you think of United Kingdom stretching from the north of Scotland to the south of England, and then from East Anglia through to the west of Ireland, we're pretty well in the middle. And that's something perhaps historically we've not been clever enough at emphasising.
So tourism, that must be on the increase?
Well, tourism took a knock during COVID, hardly surprisingly, and all sorts of consequential issues have arisen from that. And it's coming back. It's going to be interesting to see if we have a continuing economic crisis in our country, whether British people will decide to stay at home for their holidays more than they have done hitherto in the last few years, because that's bound to have an impact on tourism in our county. But what is also interesting, and we see this around the globe, that the pressures of tourism are causing physical and social problems in the places where it's taking place. We're not immune from that here. And while we have a considerable volume of high-class tourism, I mean, it's after all arguably one of the best destinations in Britain after London, Oxford, and Cambridge. It's causing problems, and there is this question of the wear and tear, both on communities where a lot of the labour is relatively low paid, not all of it by any means, and that is the wear and tear has got to be repaired as you go along, if you understand what I mean. And it's not necessarily the tourist industry that actually picks up the tab. I mean, it's the farming industry basically that carries a lot of the tab for tourism in terms of wear and tear on the landscape. Equally, travelling by car, because there's or road more generally inside the Lake District, is getting pretty fraught sometimes. So we've got a lot of issues, and you've got to find a way of ensuring that the money that's generated by tourism is recognised in the way that funding is made available for this area, either through the private sector or through the public sector, and that it doesn't in fact all end up being exported to rich investors in the Gulf or in China. And we haven't cracked it here, and it's not really been cracked anywhere else in the world, I don't think either.
So talking about farming communities, how important is Cumbria to the national food security?
It's a very important farming area, But a lot of Cumbria farming traditionally has been small farming, and the structure of agriculture in our area is very different from, say, what you find in Lincolnshire. It's partly because arable farming lent itself to economies of scale in a completely different way from livestock farming. Although it's interesting, and I'm involved in it myself on my own account, there are now new ways emerging of involving economies of scale in livestock farming, which may well change the structure of agriculture very considerably over a period.
What can I just dig in? What are those ways of doing that?
Well, in simple terms, I think that new technologies are going to play an increasingly big part, both in monitoring animals and so on, and also leveraging the way in which economies of scale can be created. And certainly, we have a dairy farm as one of our important enterprises. And the way it's being conducted now is very different from what it would have been even 7, 8 years ago. Techniques which are not essentially British, although they're sympathetic to Britain, such as trying to produce all your milk off grass and silage and not use bought-in feeds, originated in New Zealand, and they've been in the vanguard of a lot of this. And quite a lot of the things that can be done in New Zealand can be done in this country. And I think it will change the structure of farming, and it means that some of the things that we do will probably become more significant and more capable of being significant in terms of potential food security problems. On the other hand, where you've got open fells in the national park, environmental things are very important, and you've got to temper the relationship between the two so that they work in harmony. I'm not entirely sure where they're now.
You're president of the Historic Buildings and Places. Would you let us know about that? Tell us about that institution.
Yes, well, it's one of the national amenities societies, like the Georgian Society and Victorian Society. And it's interesting because of them all, it's the only one that didn't start in London. It actually owes its origins to Manchester. And like the other amenity societies, and I am personally, and have been for a long time, interested in buildings and old buildings, we are concerned with really the whole range from almost Neolithic through to contemporary buildings. And it's both something which individual people feel strongly about, this interest, but also, I think, believe is becoming increasingly important in a world where place is considered to be a very important contributor to the economy. If you have communities where people like living and where the urban structure or the rural structure is in good shape, that encourages good people to come and live and work there. That in turn promotes local services, and that in turn all adds to the output of local economies.
So you mentioned infrastructure earlier and the West Coast Main Line. So what improvements would you like to see in Cumbria, and actually, while we're at it, in the wider Great Britain?
Well, from a specific Cumbrian perspective, and it's perhaps not surprising because of the nature of the landscape, digital connectivity is a problem. Has been a problem, and is still being a problem. And the rollouts are taking longer than you might have expected, and certainly the promoters and government hoped, because now, in the sort of world we live in, that is probably, in my judgment, the key element in establishing small businesses in particular, scatter them around the countryside, because we do need to have small businesses in rural areas. And you see it happening already in the south of England to help underpin local economies where the traditional industries, such as farming, are employing fewer people. What you've then got to do, which is not straightforward, is to have a system whereby if they really are successful, they then have to move, or at least part of them move, to what you might call the more focused areas for activity, such as small towns and larger towns.
So, Richard Inglewood, it's been a great pleasure to have you here today, and thank you very much for joining this Who Are You podcast, and thank you to Christina Check for engineering it.
Can I endorse that and say thank you to you and Christine?
Thank you.